to start with our session on Sage 200 stock control. Okay, so within stock control, as in every other module, we have a utility section, and there's an option in there for system setup and stock control settings. We're going to have a little look at all these settings, what they mean, and how they change the way that the module can work for yourselves. So first of all, we have the option to use multiple locations. Now, these locations don't have to be separate geographical locations. So you may have a Cardiff warehouse, for example, and a Bristol warehouse. But if you want to use specific locations within one warehouse, you do have to have this option ticked on. So if you want to be specific about the aisle or the row or the rack within that warehouse for where you're holding your stock, you tick on your multiple locations. We have allow searching using search categories and values. It is an additional sort of search where when users are actually trying to find stock items, you can define parameters and settings for the search categories, and we'll have a little look at that in more detail in just a moment. Do you want to integrate stock management with a nominal ledger, and do you want to generate the cost of sales postings for sales order processing? As I mentioned earlier, this is what we're going to be covering in our next session, which is the integration with the nominal ledger, the different types of costing methods you can use, and how that affects the nominal and the value of your stock. Do we wish to allow entry of stock counts for items with negative stock levels? And do we wish to allow entry of stock counts for negative items with outstanding purchase orders? So this is saying when we're actually running our stock take routine, if the item has gone negative, do we want to allow that to be automatically updated when we do our stock take, or do we want to investigate that separately as a separate issue? Most people would allow the entry of stock counts for items with negatives, so when they're doing their stock take, they can in fact manage the whole stock count in one go. The profit calculation is either calculated as a percentage of the revenue or the percentage of cost, and that's purely used for our profitability report within stock control, which I'll show you a little later on this morning. Batch and serial numbered items. This is not to say do you want to use batch or serial numbered items, it's just some of the parameters that are applied if you choose to use batch numbers when you set up your product groups. So it's asking here if we wish the numbers to be recorded when goods are received. If that's not ticked, then when you receive goods in that are batch numbered, they go to an unassigned batch number, and there's a separate option to assign the batch number at any future point when you choose to do so. The number specified when the goods are issued, do you wish to select the batch number at the point that you allocate the stock or at the point that you dispatch the stock from a sales order? And all of these items we'll be covering in the next hour. It's through the stock control settings that we can set up write-off categories. Now for each write-off category you can define a separate write-off nominal code. So if we're writing off stock and we select this particular write-off category, it will be posted to this particular nominal code. There's no limit to the number of different categories that you can define. It depends on the level of analysis that you want to get out of the system. The configurable names makes no difference at all to the way that the system works. It's purely as to your terminology within your organization. So for example, instead of bin, you might want to use the word aisle. So you just type that in, and then everywhere that the word bin was used previously, it will now be replaced by the word aisle. The same is true for the reference labels. If you want to be specific about the reference that the user is prompted for when they're entering any stock transactions, you can overwrite these labels, and that will display a more meaningful reference label when you come to do the transactions. Our internal areas work very similar to our write-off categories in that if I select any of my internal areas, I can give it a description, but I can also define a specific nominal code for that internal account. So if I want to be very specific in the nominal ledger about the different internal areas that I'm issuing stock to, then I can just define a separate nominal code for each internal area. Our SOP fulfillment methods is just a way of helping the user to select the correct SOP fulfillment method when they're raising a sales order. By default, everybody has to have the option to fulfill sales orders via stock, but we have two additional options which are selectable. So are we allowing the user to fulfill a sales order from a supplier but via stock? So what that means is when we raise a sales order, we can raise a back-to-back purchase order. When we receive the goods in against that purchase order, that will be booked into our stock location, but it will be allocated to the sales order that it relates to, and we can dispatch that stock out. If, however, we were to select from a supplier direct to the customer, when we raise the sales order, we can generate a back-to-back purchase order for that order fulfillment. We just have to let Sage know that the customer has received that stock, and then the sales order is updated not only to be allocated, but also that stock will be dispatched automatically through Sage to that customer. Finally, we have landed costs, and we're just saying here that we would like to use landed costs. It's not automatically going to be applicable to every stock item. We can be very, very specific, and we can define the nominal codes that we want our landed costs to be posted to. And again, I'll be showing some examples of that later on during the session. If I go to stock maintenance, this is where we would set up the different locations that we want to be using for our warehouses. Now, it's only the warehouses we set up here. We don't set up the bins. We set them up on an item-by-item basis. So if I'm using bin 1, bin 2, bin 3, that's not set up here. It is purely the geographical location that we set up through maintain warehouses. If I just edit any one of my warehouses, we can assign it a name and a description. We can define if it's available for sales trading. So when we're raising a sales order, if this is unticked, we would not see any of the stock that we're holding in this particular location. So many people may use this perhaps as a goods in or a quarantine area, whereby the stock would be booked into this area. It's not available to be sold until it's been transferred to a saleable location. The same is true for our bill of materials and manufacturing. Is this location valid as a component source? So again, if it's a quarantine area, we may say no, it's not valid for a component source until it's transferred to a different location. We have here the postal name and address, and it's this name and address that will be used as a delivery address when we raise purchase orders to this location. The VAT code is also very important. If anybody out there is using Intrastat reporting, then you'll know that that reporting is based on where you're receiving the goods to and where you're receiving the goods from and where they're going to. So in this example, I'll be receiving the goods into a UK location, but if it were a France or an EU country, then I could define that, and that would have an effect on my Intrastat reporting. We can also set up multiple units of measure. So different stock items will be held in different units. Some may be held by meters, some by packs, rolls. You see we've got lots of different units of measure set up within the system here, and you can mix and match units of measure for any stock item. So maybe you buy by the pack of 10, but you sell individually. And Sage will cope with that combination of multiple units of measure. And again, I can be showing you some examples of how that works later on in the session. It's through stock maintenance that we set up our search categories. And these are definable by yourselves. As I say, they're a bit like analysis codes really for your stock items. So for example, we have a search category called colour. I'm just going to edit that, and these are all the category values that we have available to us. We can add any number of values, so I'll add a green. Okay. And then within our product groups, we can define which categories and which values are specific to that particular product group. Okay, so I'm actually going to have a little look at one product group. Sorry, I'm just going to go down just to show you some of the settings within the product groups. Okay, doke, so our product group code, the product groups are very important. They do define a lot of some of the attributes for your stock items that can't be changed. So for example, the product type, this is a stock item, but you could also set up service and labour items or miscellaneous items. And that allows you to keep track of the transaction history. It provides a drop-down list for users to select from, but it doesn't hold stock of those items. It's not going to affect your stock valuation at all. There are a number of different costing methods: FIFO, average, standard and actual. Today I'm just going to be working with a FIFO type item, and as I said, next month I'm going to be going into the costing methods and the nominal postings and the cost of sales in much more detail, and we can go through some examples of how that affects not only your stock valuation but the nominal ledger. You're able to set stock take days for different stock items. So if there are some items that you wish to count on a more regular basis than others, this is a default that we can apply to the product group, but it can be changed on an item-by-item basis. It's also possible to print labels as you receive goods in. So just by selecting this option, it's asking us if we want to print labels at all, and if so, do we want to print the label per individual item or per batch? And what that means is if we receive 10 items in on a purchase order, do I want to print out 10 labels, i.e. one per item, or do I want to print out one label, which would be one per batch? This is determining now whether this product group is going to use batch or serial numbers. So in the previous settings we saw it was just more of the functionality of batch numbers if we chose to use them, but this is where we say we do want to use batch or serial numbers for this specific product group. So if a product group either uses batch numbers or it doesn't. Okay, so if it's switched off, you can't have some items in another product group that use batch numbers if this has not been ticked on. Do you wish to allow negative stock? Some people will choose to do so because they may well issue goods out before they've had a chance to book the goods in to stock control. Do we want to use the item description on orders and invoices? When we look at a stock item, I'll show you where that is used. And do you want to use the reverse charge VAT rules for items in this particular product group? The default nominal codes are purely defaults for the items, but they could be changed on an item-by-item basis. Within the batch serial numbers, we determine whether the stock items are going to use batch numbers or serial numbers, and also are we only allowing sale to be made from a single batch. So in some industries, so for example, like if you're selling wallpaper, you would only ever sell from a single batch just to ensure that the colours are of the same batch, because they can vary on a batch-by-batch basis. We also determine if we want to record alternative references, sell-by dates and use-by dates. If we use use-by dates, I'll show you how that affects the item in just a moment. And also, do we allow duplicate numbers? Are we allowed to receive batch number 1 today and batch number 1 in 3 months' time? You can also set up a list of batch attributes, and again, that's a bit like analysis codes, but for specific batches. So in my example here, we're going to record the lead content for any paint that we receive in through purchase order processing or just via stock control. It's possible to enter a default value, and it's possible to make it compulsory. If you choose not to use it anymore in the future, you just untick this in use button, so you've still got the history of any attributes, but it wouldn't prompt new batches for that particular attribute detail. For this particular product group, we determine now which search category is applicable. So here we have our colours, but also we can be specific about which colours are available. So if I select everything except our green, you'll see now that when I come to enter a new item, I can select any value and that green will not be visible to me. Units of measure. This is where we define if we want to use multiple units. And if we do want to use multiple units, is it applicable to selling quantities and selling prices, buying quantities and buying prices? So you can mix and match any of those multiple unit options, and again we're going to have a little look at those in just a moment. For this particular group, we are going to be using 4 litre tins, 1 litre tin, 1 litres. That's a default for the product group, but you can add any more on an item-by-item basis. In our settings, we said we wanted to use landed costs, so that's pulled through as a default to our product groups. We can choose that for items in this group that is either not applicable by default, it's a percentage based by default, or it's a value based by default. If I were to select percentage based, I can enter a percentage, or I could leave that at 0 and change it on an item by item basis. So let's have a little look now at all that information and see where it takes place. So I'm going to create a new stock code. I'm going to call it stock code 0001. And I'm going to call this blue paint. As soon as I select my product group, Sage looks at the product group attributes and it will assign those to this particular stock item. So it's pulled through the fact that this is a stock product type, and it's also pulled through the fact that it's using FIFO as its costing method, but we also have the batch serial number tab available to us because we said that was applicable to this product group, and it's also pulled through the multiple units of measure tab because we said it was applicable to this group. So that's very important that you may need to set up multiple product groups if you need to mix and match any of those attributes. So let's go through some of our options. The current status is active by default. You can choose to make a stock item inactive, and it can be inactive from a specific date. So if an item is going to become obsolete from the 1st of May, you would just enter that inactivation date there, and then users won't see that as a drop-down stock item when it comes to buying and selling stock codes. If you are using a bill of materials, if this is your top level built item, then the item will automatically become inactive until you assign the component details to the bill of materials through the bill of materials module. Okie doke, so our batch serial number details. So the default is that this is going to be a batch numbered item because that's the default from the product group, but we could change this to serial numbers if we choose to do so. We could also make this item saleable from a single batch, and we could also untick, okay, or tick on allow the duplicate numbers. Do we want to record alternative references for our batches? Do we want to record sell-by dates? And do we want to record use-by dates? Now, if we use use-by dates, if you notice, it's asking for a shelf life. And if I say the shelf life is 30 days, it could be days, weeks, months, or years, then you'll see that as we add stock of this item, the use-by date will default to that time period after the sell-by date. The processing, by default, we're saying we want to record the batch number when the goods are received, and we want to include the batch numbers on our stock take count sheets. For the purpose of this morning, I'm going to untick that record when goods are received so we can see that assigned batch number process. It's also possible for Sage to automatically generate your batch or serial numbers, either sequential number, a combination of a date and a sequential number, or a combination of an order number and a sequential number. If I were to just select a sequential number, we can enter a separator character. We can enter a prefix, the next available number that we wanted to start at, so say 10, and the padding length. In other words, how many preceding zeros do we want to fill this batch number. On our analysis tab, this is where we define the search value associated with the search category that we said was applicable to this product group, i.e. the colour. So if I look at my drop-down list, you'll see now that all the colours are available except the green because I didn't say it was applicable to this product group. So in my example, the colour I'm looking for is blue. It's pulled through the default nominal codes from the defaults from the product group, but again, as I mentioned, this could be changed on an item-by-item basis, and this is where we'd also enter the legislative information for your intrastat reporting. If we add a supplier to a product, we can enter the supplier stock code. So we can assign a lead time in days, weeks, months, or years. We can enter a usual order quantity, and a minimum order quantity. It won't stop you, purchasing below a minimum order quantity, but it will warn you that that's what you're trying to do. So it tries to help you sort of meet the terms that you have with your supplier. We can record the supplier's list price. So I can say this is £10. If it's an expiry, we can, if it's a special offer and it expires on a specific date, we can enter that on this screen. And we just determine where we want the price source to be. Is it going to be our last buying price or the list price? So I think if you're setting up list prices, you usually want the price source to be the list price. The landed cost could be different on a supplier by supplier basis. So if you're buying items from abroad, you're going to have higher landed costs than if you're buying them from within the UK, purely due to the duty and the carriage costs. So you could change this on a supplier basis. And the way Sage will work is it'll look at the supplier in the first instance and apply the landed cost associated with the supplier. If there's nothing associated with that, then it will look at the landed cost for the item as a whole. Now, our units of measure, okay, so our base unit is 4 litre tins. And what that means is all of the ratios that we're actually going to set up are going to link back to our 4 litre tin. So we've already got a litre set up. If I just edit that, we can see here that 1 litre is made up of a quarter of a 4 litre tin. Now, for the units of measure, you can also determine or define a precision. So if you're using this item in bill of materials, sometimes the way that the maths works, you could need 0.0000001 of an item. Now, we're really not going to sell 0.00001 or purchase that lower value of our paint, so we can say no, the minimum precision is just a quarter of a litre, whatever we want that to be. Also the price basis. So when we're selling this particular item, are we going to sell a litre as a multiple of the stock unit, or is it going to be a specific price for this particular unit of measure? So in my example, I'm just going to say it's going to be a quarter of our 4 litre selling price, but it could be that it's going to be more expensive. If you buy a litre, it's more expensive than if you buy 4 litres. We can also add units of measure. So maybe I want to add a case, and we can say 1 case is made up of how many 4 litre tins, the 4 litre tins being our base unit. So I'm going to say it's going to be made up of 3 4 litre tins. In other words, it's going to be a 12 litres. The default precision is 0.001, so again we could put in something a little more meaningful. And the price basis again is going to be a multiple of the stock unit rather than a specific price for this particular unit. Alternatives, you can set up alternative items. So if I run out of blue paint, I could offer my customer green paint instead. It doesn't automatically prompt you. You do have to look at this screen if you want to find the alternative. Now the locations, because we've got multiple locations switched on, we have to select at least 1 location where we're going to store this particular item. And for each location, you can enter a reorder level, minimum and maximum level. And these levels are used when it comes to generating purchase orders. It will look at these levels on a warehouse by warehouse basis. You can add any number of geographical locations. Okay. But as I mentioned, for each geographical location, you can also define bin numbers or aisles. So if I were to select this, you can see now that the prompt is saying aisle and not bin because we changed that within our settings. So aisle, I'm going to say A1. You can also enter an allocation priority. The higher the number, the lower the priority. So I'm going to say Cardiff A1 is high priority. I'm going to add another aisle, A2, and I'm going to say that's a lower priority. So when it comes to taking stock automatically from our stock levels, it will look at the bin priorities and pull them from that in that sequence. Okie dokes. Attachments, memos, okay, that's the same in every module. I'm not going into much detail on that, if I'm not going to that at all. But what I'm going to show you are the comments that you can add as by default for your picking lists, and you can also add default comments for your dispatch notes. So for your picking list, it could be perhaps remember the instruction leaflet. Okay, and every time you print out a picking list, that will be there's an instruction for your warehouse men. And then default comment for the dispatch note, handle with care, for example, that will automatically print out on the dispatch note for any delivery purposes. Then our final tab we're going to look at are the landed costs. So it's pulled through that the landed cost is a percentage-based 10%. I could change this if I want to for this particular item. I could either make it not applicable, I could change the percentage, or I could make it value-based. You can also set your selling prices from within this screen to whatever price bands you have set up. So maybe our standard selling price is £20, selling price band 2 is £19, and £18 for price band 3. Okay. It's asking here if we want to validate the prices, and what it will do is look at our cost prices against our selling prices and just report if we're trying to sell items for less than the cost value of that item. Okay. This is to do with manufacturing, and that precision item that I told, because it's less than 1, it's saying that it may cause issues with manufacturing. I'm quite happy with that though. I'm going to say yes, I wish to continue. Okay, so that's seeing some of those settings being pulled through to the items when we actually create new items or amend our items. So what I want to do now is actually create a purchase order, and I want to see some of those settings and how they affect your purchasing of your stock items. We'll be coming back into stock control in just a moment when we start looking at stock levels and the effect of the purchase within purchase order processing. Okie doke, so let's raise a new purchase order from a supplier. Where do we wish to purchase, to supply to? So we can select from any of our warehouses. What's our purchase order date? When do we request delivery? And do we have a supplier reference number? So I'm going to add items, and I'm going to select that item that we just created. So it's defaulted to the warehouse Cardiff because that's what we entered on the front of our purchase order. However, if I select from the drop-down list, it's now only going to display the warehouses that I have associated with that item. So if I do want to receive this item into a London location, I would need to add that warehouse to that stock item before it would allow me to select it. Okie dokie. I'm not going to go into too much detail on purchase order processing because that's going to be a subsequent seminar. I just want to point out the stock settings that we were just looking at a moment ago. Now, because we said we wanted to use multiple units of measure, it's prompting us here for the buying unit and the buying price unit. So this is where I might say I want to purchase a case of this paint. The quantity I want to purchase is 1 case. The buying price unit, am I going to price it based on the 4-litre tin, or am I going to price it based on the case? So if you see here, it's showing me by default that the price that I'm going to pay is £10 per 4-litre tin. We defined a ratio that 1 case was 3 4-litre tins, and hence the net value of this order is actually £30. It's 3 4-litre tins that we're buying within a case. If I were to change this and say I want to purchase it by the case or price it by the case, you can see now that my price is defaulted to the £30, which is the price per case and not the price per 4-litre tin. So it can get quite complex, but hopefully it explains what all those different units of measures mean and how it can impact your purchase orders. The right-hand side here, the landed cost type now has defaulted to a percentage base because that's what we've set up for this item, but again you still have full control and you can change it on an order line basis. So for this particular order we could say that it's not applicable, or we could say that it's value based, and we could even change the percentage if we choose to do so. Okay, so I'm going to save this purchase order. And I'm going to go directly to receive those goods in. So go goods received, confirm goods received, select the supplier that I've received the goods from, select the purchase order that I'm receiving in, enter a GRN number and a receipt date, and then I just confirm the quantity that I've received, which is my case. Okay, it's not a 4-litre tin, it's a case which is showing at the bottom of the screen here. So I'm receiving that case, and I'm going to save that goods received. So two things to point out here. First of all, we've received that item in, but it hasn't prompted us for the batch number, because within our settings we said we wanted to assign the batch number at a future date, not at the point of goods received. The other thing is that the landed cost has not yet been applied to that stock valuation, and that won't happen until we match the invoice against that goods received. So what I mean by that is if I go back into stock control and go to a report and my stock valuation report, for that particular stock item, we will see that we've got 3 4-litre tins in stock, but they've not yet been confirmed, and the value is the £33, okay, which is not what I was expecting to see. Okie dokie. So it's taken the landed cost in. So apologies for that. I do apologise. I got that one wrong. I don't know why that happened. So it is taking the landed cost into consideration there. Okay, so it hasn't asked us, prompted us for the batch number. This is done through stock control now. Within the batch serial numbers option, we have assigned batch serial numbers. If I go to my inquiries and I go to view stock item balances for that item, okay, we'll see in Cardiff that we have 3 in stock, but if I go to my batch details, it's unassigned. We haven't yet entered those details. So let's go to assign batch serial numbers for that item. Okay, and here we have our batch number, which we can now type in the number, or we have this auto create. And if I select auto create, it's now asking us for the alternative reference, which is by the default for the batch, a default sell by date, okay, which I'm going to put as the 30th of April. And if you notice, it's already calculated the default use by date, which is based on the shelf life which we entered for this particular item. We can change it, but the default is there for us. Okay. You could also split a batch. So rather than having the one batch number, we could select split the batch. If I highlighted it first, a new screen comes up and we can enter all of the different batch numbers with their associated quantities. If I go to the attributes, okay, it's now prompting me for the lead content percentage. So I'm just going to pop 1 in there, so it's 1%, and that's available to us to report on. So now, if I just go back to my inquiries and view stock item balances, okie dokie, we still have our 3 in stock. Oh, did I not save that? Sorry, let's assign that. I didn't save it, I apologise. Assign the batch number, 001. Okay, auto create. Okay, and then, okay, so let's try again. With our inquiries, view stock item balances for that stock item. There's Cardiff, batch number details, and there's our batch number. We can drill down to look at the attributes of that particular batch, and if we click on show details, it will show us who we've received that particular batch from. If we've allocated against a sales order, we would also see the customer that we've allocated it to. Okay. I'm going to go back into our purchase order and I'm going to go into order processing and I'm going to record the invoice against that particular purchase order from that supplier. So I'm selecting our order that we've just been processing, enter the invoice date and the invoice number, and confirm that I'm being invoiced for that particular item and I'm matching it against that GRN. I'm going to post the invoice. And so what you'll see now, if I just go to the nominal and VAT analysis, okay, is that it's posting £33 as the value of our stock to our stock on the balance sheet. So that's the £30 cost price plus the £3 landed cost, which is the 10% landed cost addition that we defined. And it's posting the other side of that transaction to a landed cost nominal code that we defined in the settings within stock control when we were looking at that screen earlier on. But again, the actual nominal postings I'm going to be looking at in more detail next month. Okie dokes. Right, so now let's have a little look at what else we can do within those settings and the other effects that we have within our stock movements. So within stock control, and I go back to my stock list, I'll just refresh my screen so we can see that particular item. There are a number of adjustments that we can make, such as writing off stock. Now, as I mentioned, when you write off stock, so if I select that item, we select the warehouse that we're wanting to write the stock off from. We select a write-off category and we enter a quantity. And it's only once we've entered those details, if you look at the analysis, that you'll see that the double entry that it's going to make in the nominal is going to credit our stock on the balance sheet by the value, and it's going to debit our write-off nominal code that we defined within our settings within the write-off categories. We can also transfer stock between locations. So again, if I just select our stock item, maybe I want to transfer stock from Cardiff A1 to Cardiff A2. And the quantity that I want to be transferring, in my example here now, is going to be 1 4-litre tin, because our base unit is the 4-litre tin. That's the quantity, or the unit rather, that we're being prompted for. Asking us for a date and a reference, so TFR, and a second reference. Now, because this is a batch numbered item, if I select proceed, it's now asking me which batch number I'm wanting to be moving. I select the batch and the quantity, and I say OK. So now if I go back to my inquiries and my view stock item balances, okay, we'll see now that in Cardiff I still have 3 in stock, but I now have 2 on aisle A1 and I have 1 on aisle A2. If I select any of my aisles, I'll be able to see the batch numbers and the aisle that they're being stored at. And if we show the details, again we can see where we've receipted those batches from and any allocations associated with them. Okay, I'm going to go into the issues because the other setting that we looked at were internal issues, or internal areas rather. If I were to do an internal issue for this particular item, again I select the warehouse that I'm wishing to issue from, and I select the internal area that I want to issue to. Now, because I've got selected internal R&D, if I go back to my analysis code, it will have picked up the nominal code associated with that internal area that I defined within my, my settings within stock control. So it's going to credit stock on the balance sheet with my balance sheet nominal code, and it's going to debit my issues account that I defined specific to each internal area. So again, depending on the level of analysis you want on the nominal ledger, you can define different internal areas and different nominal codes. I'm not going to save that. I'm going to start running out of stock. Okie doke. So the last thing I want to show you with regard to the processing and the settings is within sales order processing. And what I'm going to be doing is creating a new sales order to a customer account. By default, I'm going to supply it from Cardiff, and I'm going to add items to this particular sales order. So I'm selling code 001. Now I can only see the warehouses associated with that item, just like it was within our purchase order. I can see the stock availability. And again, because it's multiple units of measure, it's asking me my selling unit. So maybe I want to sell this by the litre, and I want to sell just 1 litre of this. And it's asking me for my selling price unit. So the price for a 4 litre tin is £20. Okay, so it's calculated that my net value here is £5. 1 litre is 1/4 of a 4 litre tin, and hence the selling price for this order will be £5. If I choose to cost it per litre, now you can see it changes my unit price to the £5, which is my price per litre. I can change this on an order-by-order basis, but you can see now where it pulls through the selling units, the quantities, the selling price units, the unit prices. So again, it can be quite complex in how it calculates and works out the different selling prices, buying prices, but according to different units of measure. The nominal analysis will be pulled through from a stock item. I'm quite happy with that, so I'm going to save that line. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to cancel that, because what I did also want to show you, again, from our settings within stock control, it's on a line-by-line basis that we can determine the fulfillment method for this item, for this order. So by default, we're going to fulfill this order via stock. If we want to, we could select from a supplier via stock. And what that means is that when we save this order, we could select Save and Generate Purchase Order, which would generate a purchase order to fulfill this stock requirement. When we book that stock in from the purchase order, it will allocate the stock to this sales order. Or we could say direct to customer, which means that when we generate the purchase order and we receive those goods in, not only will it allocate the stock for that sales order, it will dispatch the stock for that sales order as well. So all we need to do is raise the invoice. I'm just going to save this sales order. And I'm now going to process. So the first thing I need to do is allocate the stock. We have to do that manually because we defined within our settings that we wanted to do so. So if I select allocate for that particular order, here we can see that it's allocated 0.25 of a 4 litre tin. Let's show the order line detail. So we can see now the blue paint, the quantity ordered. We can, if we want to, amend the allocations. So that's the allocation. We can edit it. We can include the fully allocated lines. So here we can see the quantity that's allocated, and we can also see the batch number that has been associated with that sales order, and it is allocated from our aisle 1, which is our higher priority aisle than aisle 2. So it's taken it from the higher priority aisle or bin number. Okay, I'm going to confirm that those goods have been dispatched for that order. And just save that. Okay, just produces our dispatch note, which had our batch number on there. I'm now going to generate the invoice. Oopsie. Okay, so there's our blue paint invoice with the batch number associated with it on our invoice as well. Okay, and finally I'm going to post the invoice, and it's at the point that we post the invoice that it's going to generate the cost of sale posting, which, as I say, will go through the debits and credits and the different values that are associated at our next session. So let's go back to stock control. And what I wanted to show you was within our inquiries. we have batch serial number details. And if I were to select 001, I can see all the batches. So we have our test 0011 batch number. And if we show the details, we can see details of the receipts, the allocations, the issues, and the locations of that particular batch. So we can see that we received this batch in from ASA products. We have no allocations within the system for that product, but it's been issued out to Abbey Retail. So if I need to do a recall for a batch number, I just have to go into this stock item or to this screen inquiry, call up that stock item, and I can see exactly where I purchased it from and where I've issued it to. We can also see the location of any current stock holding. So we can see that in aisle A1, I've got 1.75, and in A2, I've got 1 4-litre tin. If I just go to my view stock item balances for that item, okay, we can see that we have nothing in Bristol. We have 2.75 4-litre tins within Cardiff, held in those different aisles at that location. From here, we can drill down to the batch number details, so we see the batch number details that way. We can also look at the attributes of the stock item from within this screen. We could also drill down into the item history. So for each movement, not only can we show the details, so we see the costing price details, the sales price details, the account name that was associated with that transaction, but we can also look at the batch number for that individual transaction within our transaction history. Okay, so there's a lot to get through there, but in summary, what we looked at really are the multi-locations that you can hold within stock items, your search categories, batch serial numbers, writing off stock and internal areas and the nominal defaults that come from there, the different stock fulfillment methods, landed costs, and different units of measure. Hopefully that's given you all some insight as to some of the additional features that are available within stock control. And next month, as I mentioned, what we'll be looking at the more product group settings themselves, the different costing methods, the cost of sale postings, and the nominal ledger integration. So I'll be incorporating some more purchase orders and sales orders within that session as well to show where that detail is picked up and how that process works. So thank you all so much for your time again today. Have a lovely bank holiday weekend, and hopefully we'll see you again next month.